Welcome back, everyone, to another Student Pages Magazine interview spotlight on our financial literacy segments. We are joined today by Claire Hazelgrove.
Sure. No, thanks. I know you've spoken to Jerome as well, right? Who's the chair of the APPG. Yeah,
Yeah, he was
excellent.
great to speak to. Actually, he had a lot to say that was very thought provoking, I think.
I think it's really important to work cross-party on issues that matter like this. And I think when you can see something that is just not right in the way that it is right now, it's important to do all you can. And I think so often these days, it'll be when it's something really big, like potentially considering buying your first home, that you really start to look into what the different types of mortgage even mean. And that feels a bit bizarre that at that point of great risk, it's the first time that you're sort of sat there on Google trying to learn about this, as opposed to hearing about it more certainly in traditional education, but also outside of that as well. And I think that partnership and link up between the formal education system and then what else is done elsewhere. So, for example, with Scouts on Go Guiding, there's some brilliant initiatives there around like badges you might have heard of, but My Money Confidence sort of badge that they can earn and put on their sash. I think that's a really good thing. And I wish that existed when I was in Brownies or Guides. I think it would have helped me. So I'm glad that you've got these partnerships now between financial institutions and organizations like those to supplement what also needs to happen in school as well.
Yeah, and would you say it's initiatives like those that sort of drew you to the All-Parliamentary Group? Do you think just the overall goal there was sort of enough to draw you in and say, I want to be a part of that?
I already knew about the APPG because of having done my master's. And so, flashback, because I did it full time, sorry, I did it part time alongside full time work a few years ago. And so I actually read through before I was elected a number of the APPG's reports. And I found them incredibly insightful and helpful. And I thought, gosh, well, if I am fortunate to succeed in the general election, which was last year, was when I was elected, then I knew that this was an APPG I wanted to join and to contribute all that I could to, because I'd seen the impact that it has. And I'm sure Jerome will have mentioned, he's very good at mentioning this, it's the second largest APPG other than the APPG for beer. And I think
Yes,
that's
he
really
did. He did
telling.
mention that.
Yeah, and I think that's really telling as well. There's the breadth and groundswell of support in parliamentarians saying something isn't right here, we want something to change. But it's been one of those sticky issues. And so for me, it was having actually used the reports from the APPG as a regular person before an election, and that made me know that this was something I wanted to take part in. I feel really passionately about this issue because it's something that has annoyed me since I was at school, and that I just don't think I got the education that I needed, and I don't think a lot of other people do either. And then looking and going through all the research that I did and seeing that it still really is a postcode lottery has made me determined to pick it up. We're launching later today the APPG's upcoming report as well, looking, I'm sure you would have heard from Jerome, but at the UK and sort of the devolved nations and the distinctions between the education systems and what can be learned, but also just where there are consistent gaps as well. Because while there is devolution around this, it is still, there's still a lot that we can learn within our island and try and make sure that there is a standard to meet and beat. I think that would be a good consensus to get to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, with that in mind, then I suppose what are some of the challenges with investing in a curriculum about education, within the education system, that
Yeah.
doesn't really focus on this kind of thing, doesn't focus on young people and financial literacy?
Yeah.
What's the process like to sort of try and convince change in that area?
Yeah, so I think it's understanding what the barriers are. And the APPG, when I was reading their reports before my election, did some really good work on this, at looking into barriers. So obviously, teacher time, the focus on, particularly on teacher time, actually focusing on the subjects that are assessed. Uh, and that is in terms of exams, but also in terms of Ofsted, sort of the standard side of it. And this is not one of those topics that ticks any of those boxes as things stand. So I understand why it becomes harder. Also, teacher confidence is really lacking in this area, which makes a world of sense because we weren't taught it and they weren't taught it. So it must not feel that straightforward to feel confident in teaching without the right skills, training, and support to do that, and within career development. So I think that's a really important part as well. So I raised some of these issues in the House of Commons, in a question session. I asked the Secretary of State for Education, Bridget Phillipson, about this, ahead of what will be published later in the autumn, as you'll know, the findings of the Independent Curriculum Assessment Review, which has been going on the last number of months. And that's been a really important review. So I thought, right, I'm going to try and push on this myself as well in the ways that I can as an MP. So got up in the Chamber and House of Commons to ask about this, about will this focus on those foundational life skills like financial literacy, and also will it provide that support that teachers would need to be able to feel confident in teaching it and have the resources as well. And that was obviously it's an independent review, so she cannot preempt its findings, quite rightly, but there was a lot of warmth towards the suggestion that obviously anything that the review brings forward and is adopted into the curriculum would need to be fully sort of resourced and supported. So I thought that was a positive direction of travel. You might have seen as well that the interim findings from the assessment or curriculum assessment review have shown that financial education, broadly speaking, was the most popular issue amongst children and their parents as to what they wish they'd received in terms of school. And this was current. Let me just check actually whether it's key stage 3 or 4. I this up before. But I thought that was fascinating as well on my inbox.
It's fascinating, but it's equally not surprising, is it?
No, not
I think, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's, to be honest, to get back to a point you made earlier, it is interesting to think that teachers struggle to teach this because, yeah, they don't know themselves. It is, I never really thought about it that way, but yeah, that makes so much sense.
It's really, some of this is so basic and it's really human sort of reasons for these barriers. And so it's true, key stage 4. So this was polling of young people in key stage 4 and their parents, which showed that finance and budgeting was the top priority for additional learning at secondary level. And that's amongst those young people, so key stage 4 and their parents. And the fact it was not just the young people, and it wasn't just their parents, it was both. And I think that's really interesting. So again, there's consensus for this, but it's how best to do it. And there are different schools of thought on that. Is do you create a whole subject? Again, pressures around teacher time, resources, and all of those good things, hours in the day. And that's real. I am a fan of looking at how to make current subjects more applied and realistic. I think, and a lot of the evidence as well that is out there, including from the APPG, but others, shows that the more that you can bring topics and subjects to life and actually just weave things like this through everything, because that's our reality, right? That's how it is in the real world. Financial sort of impact or consequences or considerations are involved in everything that we do. So it shouldn't just be over there in a corner. So it's more natural to begin to have people think about it in a more joined up way, I suppose. So yes, how can you bring, I didn't enjoy studying maths at school. I found it really dry, but bringing in more applied things like this that bring it to life and give it a bit more of a purpose, I think would help certainly people like me feel like they can understand what the point is of some of the things that we were studying, because it would feel a bit more purposeful than theorems and so on that I will never use again in my life and have not done. But also it's how can you weave it through other subjects that are assessed. And I think that part, the assessment and the standards around Ofsted, are really interesting parts in this. And that's what in part the APPG is pushing for, is to say, look, it's not about trying to make things more difficult for teachers. I'm the daughter of a head teacher. I know better than to do that and to meddle or to think that I know best. I really don't. But what my job is as a politician is to say there is something that is missing in our society. It is something that is coming up time. And again, it's something I see it in my casework and some of the issues that come forward from constituents. And therefore, it's something that I want to try and do something about. Now, my part in this is a legislator. I'm also a convener in my role, so I can bring different organizations together and have them be thinking about this. I think that's really important as well. But ultimately, I think practitioners would be well placed to advise on how best to do it. But I do think that those parts, as a policymaker, around the assessment and around that sort of standards piece and monitoring within that is really important. And if we don't do that, it won't succeed. And we can see that already. I mean, look, in England, you've got theoretically financial education, on the secondary school curriculum, but that's piecemeal and it's patchwork. And I don't think that this should be a postcode lottery, because ultimately this comes down to equality of opportunity. And if equality of opportunity remains a postcode lottery, then we're failing in our society, because every child and then young person and then adult should have the same opportunities as anyone else to get on in life and to, with confidence and sort of capability, make whatever their financial decisions are. It's not about saying that one decision is right and one is wrong, but it's for that individual to feel confident and capable in making that decision. And I don't think that's often enough the case, or not until it's a bit too late, or possibly right up in front of a major financial decision. And that's something that I think as government, we should be looking at how we can address. And I hope that more of this comes out in the independent curriculum assessment review very shortly.
No, you've made a very good point there, because I can't remember for the life of me where I heard this quote, but I heard recently that the job of adults and people in positions of power is to give children the tools to make the mistakes that make them learn, which I think is interesting, because that's
Totally
especially apparent with money, isn't it? I think it's interesting as well to point out that, again, I know the statistics are a bit iffy and there's not like any clear way of being able to tell, but it is believed that roughly fewer than half of 7 to 17-year-olds are actually receiving any sort of meaningful financial education, which is, it's scary, isn't it?
Yeah, and particularly when we know, and I'm sure Jerome will have mentioned this too, but typically financial habits and beliefs around finance form before the age of 7. And so we do need to look at how do we get this to young people more quickly. And again, if you're relying on their parents who were not taught this because it wasn't available, then again, you're just baking in inequality of opportunity. And that is what I have fundamentally, an issue with. And you're quite right. It's not about us dictating what people do. It's about saying, here are those tools and do what you will. It's your life. That I don't believe in meddling in that way. It's not the role of government, but we can do a lot more to protect people. And the first duty of any government is to protect its people. I believe that, whether that is defense or whether that is something like this, because it does tie into that. It is about protection and making sure that people can do what they will in their lives, but not be caused or cause avoidable harm. And that's not currently where we are. And the fact that this has been talked about for so long, the fact there's so much consensus around it, is almost frustrating, because the last government could have done so much more on this, and it could have happened sooner. I say that because I just wish it had happened sooner, because that would be more classrooms of children, growing up with the confidence and capability to go on and do whatever it is that they want to. And so that is a missed opportunity already. So I'm really keen that we get on with this as quickly as possible, so that we can help as many people as possible get on and thrive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, I think there is a lot that's already in process, but like you've said, I think it is just one of those things where there's always going to be more steps to take and always more things to implement. And I think one of the biggest ones that I spoke about to Jerome was the dormant asset scheme, which I think is, incredibly helpful. But I mean, for people that didn't see the interview I did with Jerome, if you could just shine a bit of light on that and sort of explain what the goal of it is, where the idea came from, and what are the challenges with that being pushed back and forth with actually getting those funds released.
Yeah, that's still a work in progress, really. So it's looking at where funds go and how they support different initiatives, basically. And financial education is an area where some funding has been suggested that it would come to, but that's all being worked through, as is right and proper to do. And and this links to, well, where would that money go, and what would how would that best be spent? And again, but that ties back to what our fundamental role is as policymakers, which is setting the policy and the practice around this. And so we've got to get, what has to come first is making sure that we get things right when it comes to the curriculum, the assessment process. I think there are really interesting thoughts out there as well around, well, those new scorecards around Ofsted. Is financial literacy something that could be sort of embedded into those as a bit of a gold standard? And there's really fascinating information. Have you seen the upcoming report from the APPG, the new one?
No, not the upcoming one.
But there's really great practice out there across the country in schools, and how they're doing it is genuinely brilliant. There's a school in Wales that created their own currency linked to daffodils, which I think is really lovely. Daffodils, I believe it's called. Daffodils, that would make sense.
Wonderful.
And fabulous. And it's meaning that they've got this currency within their own school, and that has been seen by Ofsted as something that is absolutely brilliant, but it's not something that they were trying to assess. It's just something they saw. So how about if we try to help them see it and think about that when they go into different schools, rather than just, oh, something good was accidentally happening over here because someone brilliant is leading on it. And that is often the case as well. There's a lot of data conversations and anecdotes around the fact that typically in schools where financial education is doing particularly well or is particularly strong, it's where you've got a teacher who is particularly focused on it and leading on it in the school. So having a champion feels really important as well for it, to make sure that that can happen.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, it is interesting to think about as well, because I'm aware that something like what I'm about to mention will probably take a long time and a lot of restructuring to make happen. But has there been any thought put into actually restructuring the entirety of, the main core fundamentals of education? So maybe web development, financial literacy, languages perhaps, and then obviously math and science. Because again, obviously in the later stages of school, you sort of get to choose subjects, but there's certain things we teach kids from the get-go. Has it not been considered or put forward to sort of try and implement this from those stages, squeeze them in somewhere with like the core fundamentals of education?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting perspective, and I hope that the upcoming findings and conclusions of the independent curriculum assessment review, do look at those life skills and things for the future in general. And I'm also on the APPG for political and media literacy as well, for similar reasons, because again, it's about supporting people to, of course, I want everyone to vote Labour, but they're not going to, and that's fine. So it's not about saying you should do this, same principle. It's about just having the confidence, because I know as an MP, in my inbox, I have a significant number of people getting in touch with me and who actually should be getting in touch with our local council or perhaps even like the town council, but they don't know who to go to. And that delays them, potentially causes them harm in getting the response and solution that they need to their problem. And so again, it's about that, whatever decision that people make in our democracy, it's about having that confidence and capability to do so, feeling like they've got the tools to be able to do that and know how to get help when they need it, because fundamentally that's a big part of what I'm here for. But I don't have jurisdiction over council matter. I simply don't. That's why we elect councils and councillors. That's why we have these bodies that do things differently. And so things like that. And I think the media piece, to your broader point there about things, in the world we live in with misinformation and disinformation, there is so much of it. I think we've got to get back to fundamentals and look at, well, how can we make sure that the education system is truly providing children, young people with the skills that they will need to thrive in this much more complex world that we are in, with different challenges and opportunities than when their teachers were learning and their parents were learning. And I think that's really important to be able to look at. So to your broad point, I agree that there needs to be like a rethink. Again, back to my point about being daughter of a head teacher, I won't specify, how and the what, but I totally agree with that principle. It does need a refresh. I think there's also something really relevant about the live debate going on right now about online harms, because there is so much false information from very influential accounts about financial decisions. And
it's worse now with AI, no doubt.
Yeah. So exactly. So it's getting ahead of that, I think, is really important. And it is a really live and relevant part of the conversation that I think historically hasn't been as centered in the discussion around financial education, because it wasn't so much where people were getting their advice from. It was like a lack of advice, perhaps, and loan sharks and things like that. But now it's more hard. There's also all of these other, if you're on TikTok and you've been searching anything around financial advice, you will be served plenty of content from just random accounts without any legitimacy or verification or quality standard mark or anything, that could be sending you down a certain new trend or down a certain path that isn't actually one that you would want to go down, but you believe it's what the route is to something in particular. And I think that's really risky. And so again, it's it just, and I'm not sitting here saying that I personally have all the solutions to this. I absolutely don't. But I do think it's really important that, again, in my role and parliamentarians' roles and government's role as convener and then actor, I think it's about trying to understand from all the different stakeholders what's going on, what's driving this, and what role is it right for government to play, as well as, for example, tech companies and platforms, to be able to ensure that young people, indeed older people, are getting the information that is real, true, and fair and accurate around some of those important decisions that they will ever make in their lives.
No, 100%. And I mean, I think it's interesting as well because I think there's a lot of people that young people to get change made here are relying on. But what can we actually do as the next generation, like myself sat here, people my age, people younger, what can we do to help push this progress forward? And what can we generally do as the next generation to get ourselves some financial education?
Yeah. And that's the challenge. I think we're in a good problem spot in some ways, and that there is quite a lot of resources out there now, certainly in comparison with when I was younger. So you've got lots of different banks, financial institutions, charities, collaborations, our secretariat, Young Enterprise. There's a lot of brilliant information out there. Actually, one of the findings of the report that we're publishing as a sneak peek is almost trying to condense that a bit and signpost, because for teachers, for parents, for young people, you don't quite know if you're looking at the best possible resource. You know that you're looking at a resource, but there are so many out there. It does need a bit of distilling. So I think there's something to be done there, so that if people are interested in looking at things for themselves, that it's a bit clearer as to where to start and how to go about that. I also think get active on it. I would say that my background before all this was, and still is in so many ways, in campaigning and advocacy. And, I think that people should always be using their voices to push for change. And it really does help. There are, of course, MPs like myself and Jerome and others who just care about this, and we'll always keep plugging away on it and be keeping an eye out for things. But if it's not something that an MP is particularly close to or aware of the details on, those stats around kids largely forming financial sort of views and approaches by age 7. If you don't know that, then it's not going to shock you. But if you do, it does. So it's what can you do? Write letters to your MP, send emails in, go and try and meet with them, or talk to your parents if you're particularly younger as well, and say that you want to know more. If that's something that, to your question about what people can do themselves, I think don't underestimate the power of your voice to be able to make a difference, because it very much can do.
No, absolutely. Yeah, just having that advocacy, because at the end of the day, if you guys do it, we can too. I think, I mean, that's the way you get into positions like your own, isn't it? It's like you have to have that passion and have that voice to get to where you are. So, no, absolutely. And I mean, so from your perspective, then, in your experience, how do you explain more complex financial concepts to people who don't understand it and people who don't have that pre-existing literacy?
Yeah, I don't try to, because I'm not an expert in that. I'm not a teacher. I'm not an educator. But I totally agree with what you're saying. Things do need to be made clear. But I also think we shouldn't underestimate the ability of people to take on complex sort of, approaches and things, because they can. It's just sometimes they're not given any information at all. And that's part of the challenge, I think, around financial education. And when you know what something is, it's a lot less complex. So I don't think it's a case of trying to dumb it down or anything like that. But I do think it's a case of trying to make sure that things are communicated in lots of different ways, different learning styles, neurodiversity. I think that's really important in this as well. Wanting to make sure that people have this information in whatever style or format that they need it in is really important. And again, I think often too overlooked as well. So that's something I'm passionate about, just accessibility of this in lots of different ways. But teachers will know best on that, and we should listen to them. Again, my dad would tell me very much off if I started to meddle in that as a politician. I'm quite right too. But I do think we need to be making sure that it gets into as many hands as possible. And again, I think it's about that collaboration. It's not just about school or formal education. It's about, well, how can scenarios and places where young people are, and not just young people, but beyond, but with this focus on young people, so the clubs that they go to, the spaces that they are continuing their more social education in, I think that is really important, like Scouts, like Girl Guides, like others as well, to be taking and supporting and bolstering what's happening in school, assuming we can get that to a better place, then reinforcing that in ways that are less education focused and more practical out in society, I think are really interesting. I think a really good example of this actually is Go Henry, who I'm sure you'll have come across, who have the sort of money challenges that kids, young people can learn from, digital sort of storage of pocket money, and then the card that you can get. They were in Parliament just last week, and I went to go and see them. And I would support the work that they do. I think it's brilliant, and have the card like a banking card, a proper bank card that young people can use. And begin to, within a really safe way, begin to build up their confidence and experience in doing it. Because so much of the education around money and things like that at the moment is still very cash focused. And that's important, but that's not how most transactions are done. And actually, a lot of evidence and data shows that transactions are more likely to be made online earlier in life now as well. So we need to just recognize the realities of that. So it's not just about learning about fractions and the, however much pounds and pence and what that looks like in terms of physical coin, but it's in terms of, well, what does that mean through the transactions that you see your parents carrying out every day with their cards, or with their apps, or with their moms, or whatever it is. We do money differently now, and so it's making sure that what is being taught is relevant and up to scratch feels really important too.
It's interesting you mentioned about online transactions as well, because I don't think it's just kids witnessing their parents making those.
Yeah.
Parents are making those for their kids as well, because me and Jerome actually touched on, these currencies that children somehow understand now more than actual currency, being these online video game currencies. We spoke about how that could potentially be a way in for education, with like V-Bucks and Robux on these online games. It's so commonplace now. It's like, surely that's a pretty decent way in for young people.
I think so. I think it's that 360 approach. Again, it's not just about schools. It's where are young people spending their time and how can we access them and reach them in ways that are appropriate. It's like you think about YouTube and that being, the world's second largest, I believe this is all true. It was true. But it was the second largest search engine in the world after Google, YouTube. And so that feels phenomenally important in terms of thinking about how we use that, yes, through video creation, but also through the ads that you can place at the end of clip. There are lots of different ways of doing it. And I think it needs a really holistic, look at. And again, of course, some of that can be government, but not all of it can, and not all of it should be either. And I think a more 360 approach means that there's more chance of more people feeling like it's content that resonates with them or is something that is of interest to them. Some people are going to like government content. Other people are very much not. They might not trust that. I understand that. And that's something that we need to work on through building up political trust and all of those things as well. But it's crucial then to be thinking about, as you say, the influencers or other spaces, and how can we do that in ways that feel natural and organic to those individuals, because at the end of the day, what matters is that we're reaching people with the information that they feel they need to make their life choices with confidence, and to know that they, are doing what they want to do with their lives to the best of their abilities without, receiving harmful content or feeling uncertain about what they're doing and taking on significant debt, because that's not good for them. It's not good for society.
No, it's an absolute lose-lose situation in that sense. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think, if we do look at just the general concept of financial education for young people, it really is, I'd say in most ways, but I believe in every way, it is really just a win-win situation, isn't it? Because, it just helps everyone. It helps the kids learn for when they get older, but it also helps their parents out. In the wider scheme of things, it also helps the education system because you get a bit more diversity in there. It's fascinating to think just like, well, what is there to lose realistically?
I agree. I really do. I think it's how we do it. I think, again, like the consensus is there, the case is being made. Seeing those interim results from the independent curriculum assessment review, showing that strength of feeling that this was something missing in education from young people and their parents, well, that feels like it would be quite surprising if then the final conclusions didn't respond to that in some way. I think that would be a real challenge for that review. So I'm optimistic in terms of what we will see as a result of that. Look, there's always more work to do, as there is on everything. I don't expect this to be This is not a magic button that you can press and suddenly great, the reviews come out and said this and everything's going to be sorted. No, and it's going to take time. We're going to have to continue to do our reports on the APPG and push, and the evidence and case will need to be built. The Select Committee on Education will need to continue to do its work. The Department for Education and the brilliant team that we've got in there now as well will want to do their work on it, because they, in this Labour government, the whole focus of that team in so many ways is breaking down barriers to opportunity and making sure that all children can thrive. And I think this is squarely one of those topics. And so I continue to, as will others, but I will continue to be advocating internally and pushing it, but also helpfully providing the evidence. And that's the point of the APPG, is to bring people together, to provide that evidence and do that research, gather that insight and make the case. Because there's a lot of support for it, but making sure that we've got that to make sure that we're following evidence and data is really important to this Labour government. So that's the approach that I support the government taking, and look forward to continue to boost from the APPG.
Absolutely. I mean, you guys are doing some absolutely incredible work. And I suppose, just to summarize, again, I know you're obviously not a financial supervisor or anything like that, but if you could just try to generalize and give students some advice as to what steps they should take if they want to see changes in this area, and also just what they can do to be better in charge with their money in absence of the current, groundwork that they need.
Yeah, look, if there are people who are interested in how they can do this, then that's amazing in of itself, because it shows that they've got the interest, and I think that's half of it sometimes. Now, where to go and get that information? There's a lot of good information out there, but just trust reliable sources. So do trust, the financial institutions, the big ones, what you're getting from school, what you're getting from organizations that have actually been working in partnership with others, like Girl Guides, like the Scouts. So those organizations that are trusted and true. Speak to your parents about it, because it will be of interest to them to know that this is something you want to know more about as well. They may be able to support you in that directly, or know folks who can. But also do use your voices. Email or write a letter to your MP. You can definitely do that, and I hope your parents or others will be able to support you with that, because I love getting letters from young people across my community and knowing what people of all ages care about and want to see. It helps me make the case as your advocate. That's my job for folks who live in my community. That's actually what I'm here to do. And so do use your voices. Don't underestimate your power in that. And use your critical thinking, the sniff test, when it comes to other information that you might be seeing via other channels as well. Because there's a lot of information out there today, but stick with the information and the organizations that you know and trust, and to provide reliable information.
Absolutely fantastic. Claire, thank you ever so much for joining us. Honestly, it's been a very informative chat. I've been loving these talks with the All-Parliamentary Group because, again, I just think the initiative you guys have and the aims and the goals, I think it's absolutely fantastic. Such an important issue. So, yeah, just thank you ever so much. And it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you.
Happy to help. Happy to help. Well, thank you very much, and lovely to meet you.
Thank you ever so much. You too.
Thanks. Bye.